Lucio Fulci's early Gialli, upholding traditions but destroying the world. I'm the Italian Horror Guy, and this is the Italian Horror Guy podcast. I will start the discussion in 1969 with Perversion Story. This film represents Fulci's move towards the types of films he would become known for. Perversion Story is a giallo, but not in its completed form. It has the sleaze and violence that fit themselves nicely into where the giallo was headed, and tells us a lot about Fulci's work and where it was headed. We might call this film a psychological thriller, but the seeds of Fulcian horror were sown here. In this brief era of Fulci's work, we can see a significant similarity, but also a contrast to the trends of American horror cinema at the time. Monster movies were largely dead, replaced with the possession films of the late 1960s and early 1970s. If we can understand such films as the depiction of outside forces infiltrating and threatening the family unit, we might understand Fulci's films in this era as the depiction of inside forces wreaking havoc. The female protagonists, for example, of Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist, are trying to defend the sanctity of their homes. The female protagonists in Perversion Story and A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, as we'll get to later, are a threat. They are the threat, in some sense. In all cases, the story revolves around family drama. In Perversion Story, there's a sense quite instantly that things are a little bit off. After some lengthy and thorough, if not annoyingly shaky, images of San Francisco through the opening credits, as well as a messy, jazz-esque Riz Ortolani score, we're introduced to our protagonist, George du Maurier. His brother Henry hands him a newspaper which says the clinic they both work in, but George runs, is potentially soon to perform a heart transplant. George is happy to suggest newspapers are always full of misinformation, but adds, anyway, maybe one day we'll do a heart transplant. Henry takes issue, saying, you know damn well that's not the point. We then see George's apparently sickly wife, Susan, who suggests their marriage is a mess and blames it entirely on George's preference for the clinic. George, for his part, seems slightly inattentive to his wife. In the very next scene, he sees a young nurse, makes the kind of noise one usually makes after tasting some delicious, sugary treat, and asks, how long have you been with us? At the end of this introduction scene, the nurse asks George if he loves his wife, to which he pauses, looks away and says, of course. Then we immediately cut to a scene of George sleeping with a different woman that isn't his wife. This is what many giallo films, and specifically Fulci's Gialli, do. They make us feel like everyone is untrustworthy. George is played by the good-looking and highly charming Jean Sorel. His character is smooth and charismatic, but he is also a cheating jerk. It is hard to shake the feeling, as the film moves along, that he deserves many of the awful things that happen to him. The film asks us to make quite a leap of faith, however, to believe some of the absurdity. Susan dies, or so we are told, in the clinic. George, despite being her husband and a doctor, seems taken aback by this, and maybe mildly upset. Soon after, George attends a very dated strip bar called the Roaring Twenties, in which topless women stand on stages, swing on swings, and tap balloons around. A stripper later revealed to be Monica Weston completes a performance atop a motorbike. She looks exactly the same as George's deceased wife, with different coloured hair and eyes. Here, the film starts to confuse us. Hopefully, not because we are fooled. This is very obviously his actual wife, but because the film wants us to sympathise with George. He is a generally unlikable male character, or a generically unlikable male character, obsessed with money, power, and sex. But he looks confused and unsure. Monica sits at the table with George and his mistress, Jane. In one shot, George can be seen clasping his hands together as Jane glares at Monica, and a private investigator sits at the bar in the background. George is trapped from all angles, including his own impulses. He soon finds himself at Monica's apartment. As he explains, sometimes stupid things give one the most pleasure. This notion seems to animate his entire character. The jazzy score builds the tension. George eyes a naked Monica on the bed as she slowly approaches him. But the tension is released. Saxophone dominates the score. The two engage in some passionate lovemaking, even if George is having flashes in his mind to his supposedly dead wife. Nonetheless, he seems to enjoy the whole experience, a seemingly lengthy one at that. We are left with a number of questions here. Why is George doing this? Is he working out whether this is really Susan? Does he not recognize the naked body of his wife? Is he just hopeless that he could not is he just so hopeless that he could not refuse such an encounter? Well, I feel like the latter is definitely true. Stephen Thrower made an observation that I think is half right. He asserted that Perversion Story presents us with a picture of men who are lost to themselves and of women who just couldn't care less. There is no doubt that George is lost to himself, but Susan, or Monica, seems to want him to suffer. She seems far from indifferent on that topic. In their brief fight earlier, the Susan version almost hisses her anger at George. She was genuinely enraged by his indifference to her. If George is the stereotypical male in search of sex, money, and power, Monica is the stereotypical femme fatale with a notable addition. She has every reason to hate her victim. But indeed, victim he is. Fulci was a master of confusing the issue. It seems strange that this cheating sleazebag is actually a victim, because as much as we may sympathize with him, the film is not particularly concerned for his well-being. After George is successfully framed for the non-murder of Susan, he finds himself awaiting a rather abrupt execution at the end of the film. Henry's brilliant madness of framing George to kill him and receive Susan's life insurance money finally flips it over the edge. George doesn't deserve this. As he awaits his execution, the film loses its colour and sleaze and becomes entirely clinical. The last time we see George, he's being strapped up and sent into the gas chamber. The ending of the film is very strange, but that is significant in itself. We are led to assume George has been executed. A news reporter, after the fact, describes the events. As he talks, we cut to Henry and Susan meeting in Paris. A disgruntled former lover or client of Monica shoots them both dead. At this point, we don't know when this event occurred exactly. We cut back to the reporter who concludes his report saying that a last-minute phone call prevented George's execution due to the murders in Paris. The reporter leaves the building and the movie ends. This leaves us in a strange place. George, for all intents and purposes, is a villain. He starts the movie unambiguously in this way. He has destroyed his marriage and is a sleazebag, a liar, and an adulterer. But by virtue of mere contrast, he deserves sympathy. George is a good looking man who is hopelessly bad at controlling his urges, but he does not deserve execution. Yet, we, as an audience, are given no reward for caring. The ending is empty, and deliberately so. Any joy we get by knowing George survived is snuffed out by not seeing his reaction. He has lost his brother and wife, who both wanted to kill him, and his life beyond the end of this film looks quite grim. We essentially feel nothing. In this era, Fulci depicts little chaotic worlds falling apart. When justice is done, the world is still broken. These aren't threats to the world that get defeated. They actually do change the world. The characters who survive are changed forever. This was true of the Giallo film broadly, and very true for a lizard in a woman's skin. If Perversion's story depicts a world of bad people doing bad things, Lizard is far more brazen in its depiction of debauchery. This world is bad. The more the inhabitants of this world attempt to keep up appearances, the more ridiculous they look. In Lizard, our main protagonist, Carol, is an adult suffering something of a sexual identity crisis. In the early stages of the film, she is shown to have repeated and rather erotic dreams of sexual fantasy with the next door neighbor, a deviant named Julia Jura to be precise, indicating that these scenarios are indeed the result of a sexual identity crisis is the fact that she sees a psychiatrist to work through the meaning of her dreams. The psychiatrist tells her that she is having that she's having these dreams because her subconscious disapproves of Julia's lifestyle. Julia regularly hosts drug-fueled orgies in her apartment. Something that seems to fuel this sense of crisis, or at least to confirm it, is the fact that at no stage does the psychiatrist pose the possibility that her dreams are simply down to a sexual attraction to this woman, or perhaps women in general. Carol seems to seek the help of senior men through the course of this film who never seriously assist in making her situation any easier. Of course, the film relies on our assumption that Carol is a damsel in distress to distract us from reality. Lizard is a strange film. Its impact comes from contrast. It is half procedural, police investigation, half surrealist nightmare. The moments of surrealism are particularly striking because the convoluted plot puts our minds in a very factual and analytical state, only to pull the rug out from under us. But perhaps the rug was never there. We are made into subjects of Carol's world before we even have any context or a single word has been spoken. It begins with a similar score to Perversion's story, but this time by the unmistakable Ennio Morricone. It is more complicated and unpredictable, but has an appropriately early 1970s prog rock feel that is perfectly in keeping with the era and the London setting. The more complicated parts of the theme play through the opening credits, inviting us into a world of growing sexual liberation. The times very much are a changing. You can hear it. We then see Carol on a train. There are some well to do types sitting in the compartments, wearing nice clothes and sitting peacefully. Carol tries to enter, but the doors are locked. The people ignore her. She pushes through some more people and soon finds herself amidst some less well to do types. Many people are naked, conducting something of an orgy. The score is droning and uncomfortable. Carol falls onto a bed in a different place and finds herself in a compromising situation with who is later revealed to be Julia Jura, played by Swedish actress Anita Strindberg. The music slows down, becomes more calm, and the two engage in some sensual lovemaking. This is now becoming a bit of a theme of Fulci's work. Then Carol wakes up. We're off to a flying start. Straight away, we see Carol drawn into a world of depravity. Perhaps her subconscious mind knows she should join the people in the cubicles with all the safety and boring high society. But it's drawn elsewhere. The naked people, indeed, the naked Anita Strindberg, are far more interesting. Before we can even gather ourselves, we already know our protagonist is attracted by the world of perversion, but knows she should not be. If we use perversion story as a guide, it should already be obvious. Carol is the deviant woman and is therefore the villain. In the very next scene, we get a glimpse into Carol's monotonous existence. She sits at a fancy desk in a large bedroom, writing, and a knock comes at the door. "Come in, Frank," says Carol. But Frank's daughter, and Carol's stepdaughter, Joan, walks in and says, "I didn't know my father was supposed to knock too." The pair then have a strained conversation about good manners and breakfast. How exciting. Whatever Carol's life is, it is extremely boring. She has a procedural relationship with her husband and is distant from people in general. This is a boring life, and we are encouraged to agree. Now, lest you think my analysis series too intricate and excessive, on this occasion, Fulci actually welcomed analysis, albeit in a somewhat mocking way. Because, as mentioned earlier, Carol is actually seeing a psychiatrist of the bombastically Freudian ilk that Fulci loved to create. The psychiatrist is also a poet. "That's the corridor of the flat next door. You have already dreamed about it before." Perhaps he's a Dr. Seuss-like poet, but a poet nonetheless. So he gives this explanation, and Carol takes him through her strange dream. This is the contrast between the fantastical and the grounded. Carol spins a story to an unsuspecting and overconfident psychiatrist, which she eagerly uses to pontificate about her unconscious mind. He reaches some overconfident conclusions. Julia Jura represents for you degradation and vice. See, he's only half correct, of course. Carol fully engages in the degradation and vice. A rule to follow in Fulci's early Giallo films is that if something seems ridiculous or fantastical, it probably is. The most logical explanation is also the most probable one. Fulci's open disdain for psychiatrists is probably also a giveaway. Michael Mackenzie wrote a truly excellent PhD thesis and analysed Fulci's work in great detail. I do feel, however, that his observation that Lizard is told from the perspective of the men in the film is incorrect. Upon first viewing of the film, it is easy to draw this conclusion because we are misled. But let's consider the facts so far. We see Carol's dream about Julia. She is the central focus in the scene with her stepdaughter, and she controls the information she gives to the psychiatrist, even what he thinks about it. Indeed, in a later scene, she manipulates the psychiatrist into believing the dream was mere representation, and the murder was representative of removing the part of her that attracted or that was attracted to degradation and vice. He even explains away the presence of two witnesses to her murder. His determination to read everything symbolically and nothing literally produces this quote. They were part of you as well. You wanted witnesses for your crime, forcing you to leave proof. This action has certainly produced in your subconscious the removal of a block which will surely give us good results. Quite astonishingly, with some brilliant acting, Carol produces a subtle but distinct smile as her psychiatrist delivers this nonsense. She has fooled him and she knows it. Mackenzie was correct when he said that more often than not, the true mystery is the central woman herself. The mystery is actually quite simple. Our determination to read into Carol as a victim makes her a mystery. If we just realized the film is almost entirely from her perspective, it becomes astoundingly obvious that she is guilty. In fact, the film shows Carol murdering Julia, then Carol explaining it as a dream. The fact we are so preoccupied trying to work Carol out is the exact reason we misinterpret things. If we took everything at face value, Carol's guilt would be clear. This is also the case in the very next scene. We see a number of shots of Julia looking somewhat out of it, with a lot of naked friends there partying. This is then contrasted with Carol and her family. Frank, her husband, uses a nutcracker to open a nut. Carol looks down at the table with slightly wandering eyes, and they all sit there eating their fancy dinner. Eventually, Carol's father breaks the silence. What on earth are those neighbours of yours up to? It sounds like a football match. Carol smiles at the joke, but it quickly fades, and she begins to think about Julia, as shown by a number of fast cuts. If we're paying attention, there is no mystery here. If reading this film through a too readily feminist lens, one would assume Carol is being oppressed, that her admittedly pretentious family life is boring and not allowing her to meet her full potential. But as is often the case in films of this era, the feminist reading is found wanting. Lizard leans fully into the hippie sexual revolution culture, but by no means approves of it. It is titillating and highly tempting, all the naked people, led by Anita Strindberg. But the alternative is hardly presented as preferable. If you really want to stretch the feminist reading, you could say, well, Carol only had to kill Julia because of what her repressive patriarchal family would think. but that would be a stretch. The film presents the sexual revolution as an entirely awful solution to society's problems. Perhaps, in hindsight, the film was right. After all, family life does have a lot to recommend it. And this world seems to be destroying Carol's mind. There is a glorious continuity to Jean Sorel appearing as the boring, adulterous husband in both the Perversion Story and Lizard. The fact his role in this film is less pronounced should be yet another indicator that this film is from Carol's perspective. We see Frank cheating with Deborah, an apparent family friend. Immediately after, the film cuts to Carol, again having her train dream. It is full of naked people, but she's panicked. She soon finds herself in a room with each of her family members sitting in chairs. They all appear to be dead, with disturbing expressions on their faces, and Joan is bleeding, with her intestines dropping into her hands. It is all very disturbing, and a taste of the horror Fulci would later move into. More significantly, Carol does seem to care about her family, at least on a subconscious level. That her fears manifest themselves in a surrealist hellscape of a dream, one we might associate with a bad acid trip, suggests the film's hostility towards the hippie lifestyle. The more she engages in it, the worse she feels about her life. We are soon introduced to the triumphant force in the film, the police. They are triumphant both in solving the case and also for symbolically restoring the traditional order. Inspector Corvin, played by the excellent Stanley Baker, has an air of confidence and certainty about him, a stark contrast to the other men in the film. As he makes his way to the crime scene of Julia's body, he whistles and points out to his subordinates that they need to act quickly to solve this murder. Nonetheless, he jokes, there should be a law against finding bodies on a Saturday. He is very much a seen it all before kind of policeman. He is order, fighting against chaos. The hippies are the chaos. Inspector Corvin is told, it looks like we've got it in the bag. A hippie has confessed to the murder, it seems. Corvin seems skeptical, but his colleagues seem convinced. I did it, says the hippie, to avenge me brother George. Corvin presses for details, but the hippie's version of events contradict the facts already established. He dramatically says, remember my brother George? And plunged her with the dagger. He becomes highly animated, jumping up and giving more detailed information, cackling maniacally, but the police realize he's lying. This man is a hurdle, a time waster, a liar, and possibly high. His eyes look slightly spaced. He has long hair, wears jewelry and a flamboyant shirt openly enough to reveal a fair portion of his chest. He is the hippie world personified, at least in the eyes of this film, and probably Fulci. He represents threat to order, both literally and metaphorically. The other hippies, the ones from Carol's dream, are both evil and useless. Carol relaxes in a beautiful open space before the male hippie, known as the Redhead, comes to murder her. A chase ensues, and Carol escapes, but sees the very disturbing scene of dogs hung up with their intestines hanging, a common theme in this film for some reason. This is a clever sleight of hand trick from Fulci, who was good at these. Presenting so many people as evil or useless, we end up on Carol's side by default. Even Frank, who we have just seen cheating on Carol, tells her that the grounds were searched thoroughly and nobody saw a hippie wandering in the park. He also takes the side of the doctors, claiming she was hallucinating. But hallucination, especially at the time, was associated, ironically enough, with hippies. The redhead is arrested after trying to kill Carol again, coming down out of coming down and out of saliva, in desperate need of a fix, is a pathetic sight. Having already confessed to killing Joan, an unfortunate victim of the chaos, the redhead explains to the police what he saw the night of the murder: a lizard in a woman's skin. Neither he nor Jenny are completely clear what they saw. As Jenny explains, we were filled with acid from our heads to our toes. The redhead genuinely has no memory of the murder, though. Anything's on the cards when you're on a trip. You're capable of doing anything. He then explains he received news of an upcoming arrest and presumably murdered Joan as a result. The two hippies are evil and stupid, always high or tripping, not sure whether they're murderers or not, so they murder to cover their tracks. This is a bleak picture of hippie and drug culture. But it would be unfair to see lizards simply as a very hostile attack on the sexual revolution. After all, while Carol murders Julia to avoid the scandal, she is unambiguously evil for doing so. And aside from the blackmailing threat, is Julia actually depicted as evil by the film? She seems happy taking drugs and having orgies, but she is no murderer. Amidst all the surrealist dreams, the orgies, and the horrific violence, there is the even more sinister force of Carol. She is more insidious and more calculated, but is still the ultimate threat to order. In the final scene, however, order is properly restored. With her father having committed suicide, Carol stands at his grave, and Corvin comes to talk. You were so mixed up with Julia, you were scared. In real life, Mrs. Hammond, not in your dreams. You were quite sure you wouldn't be mixed up in her death because there'd never been a whisper of this relationship of yours. You went to her that night, quite sure that she'd be alone, and you killed her. You only noticed the two hippies afterwards. When you saw them, it was too late. What you couldn't have known was the hippies were riddled with acid. They didn't see you. You didn't know they were blind witnesses. Carol's reaction to this is fascinating. She is entirely emotionless, accepting her fate, until she finds out the hippies saw nothing. Only then does she look to the side, shocked and seemingly angry at herself, not for getting caught, not even for murdering Julia, but for the missed opportunity to escape punishment. She believes her mistake was not realizing she would get away with the crime, not the crime itself. She says no more words to Corvin before the film ends, as his lengthy monologue continues. He concludes, you committed the murder in full consciousness, Mrs. Hammond. You're nothing more than a murderess. He stares almost directly at the camera. Corvin adds, that's why your father took his own life. A police car arrives, and Carol gets in without any protestation. She is unapologetic, calm, and dignified. She shows no remorse. She is a lizard in a woman's skin. I'm the Italian Horror Guy, and this has been the Italian Horror Guy podcast. Join me next month.